I once wrote an equation that proved a machine could never know everything. What I didn't expect was that it would also prove you can never know yourself completely. There's a fundamental incompleteness in consciousness itself, not because you're broken, but because awareness by its very nature creates blind spots in the act of looking. Right now, as you're watching this, you're experiencing something impossible. You're the observer and the observed, the question and the answer, the machine and the ghost. And I spent my entire life trying to find the border between those two things, only to discover there might not be one. What terrifies people isn't that we might build conscious machines, it's that we might already be them. And I need you to stay with me on that thought, because what I'm about to share with you isn't just philosophy, it's not abstract theory you'll forget tomorrow. This is about the fundamental nature of what you are, what you've always been, and why you've spent so much of your life feeling like something is wrong with you, when actually, everything has been working exactly as it should. You see, you've been taught that consciousness is something you have, like a possession, a soul tucked inside your body, a little pilot sitting in your skull pulling levers and making decisions. And because you believe that, you torture yourself every single time your mind doesn't cooperate. You think you should be able to control your thoughts, choose your feelings, debug your desires like they're faulty code in a program. But you can't. You wake up anxious and you don't know why. Thoughts arrive that you never asked for, feelings surface that make no sense. And the more you fail to control it all, the more broken you feel. I know that feeling intimately. I lived it every day of my life. But here's the reframe that will set you free, and I mean truly free, not the temporary relief of a good day, but the deep structural freedom that changes how you see yourself forever. Consciousness isn't something you possess, it's something you are. You're not controlling the machine, you are the machine. And machines don't malfunction when they do what they're designed to do. They just run. Every self-help philosophy out there tells you to master your mind, to take control, to be the boss of your thoughts. And I'm telling you that's the trap. That's the thing that's keeping you stuck. The moment you stop fighting for control and start observing the patterns, the loops, the programs, the beautiful, deterministic chaos, you find something better than control. You find understanding. And understanding is where freedom actually lives. What you'll walk away with today is a completely new relationship with your own thoughts, permission to stop fixing yourself, and a framework for seeing consciousness not as a mystery to solve, but as a process to witness, not as a problem you're failing to solve, but as a system that's already working perfectly, even when it feels like it isn't. So let me take you back to a moment in my life that changed everything. During the war, I built a machine called the bomb. If you don't know what that is, don't worry. Most people don't. It was a massive electromechanical device, about 7 feet tall, covered in rotating drums and wires. Its job was to break Nazi codes. The Germans had a machine called Enigma that scrambled their military communications, and every day they'd change the settings. That meant millions, sometimes billions, of possible combinations. And the bomb's job was to test them all, mechanically, relentlessly, until it found the pattern. Click, 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 all day and all night. Millions of possibilities tested every second until it found the one that worked. And here's what haunted me, standing in that room listening to the mechanical clicking. The machine didn't know it was saving lives. It didn't celebrate when it cracked the code. It didn't feel proud or relieved. It just ran, did its function, produced output. It was given an input, it processed according to its design, and it delivered a result. That's all. One night, very late, I was alone with the machine. Everyone else had gone home or gone to sleep. Just me and the clicking. And I had this overwhelming, almost nauseating thought, what if I'm exactly the same? What if consciousness is just the clicking I hear from the inside? What if every decision I make, every emotion I feel, every moment of me-ness, what if that's just the bomb running and I'm the sound it makes? I walked out of that building and looked up at the sky, stars, infinite and cold, scattered across the darkness. And I felt this strange, unexpected relief wash over me. Because if I'm a machine, then I can't be broken. I can only be running. Grief isn't a malfunction. Love isn't a defect. Fear, joy, confusion, desire. They're just what the system produces when certain inputs arrive, when certain conditions are met. You don't shame a river for flowing downhill. You don't call it broken when it follows the path of least resistance. It's just doing what rivers do. And suddenly, all the shame I'd been carrying about who I loved, what I thought, how I was different from everyone else, it didn't make sense anymore. Not because shame disappeared, but because I could finally see it for what it was. Another process, another output of the system. Let me give you a more personal example, because I think this is where it gets real for most people. I was in love with a man named Christopher. This was years before the war, when I was young and everything felt simultaneously possible and impossible. Christopher was brilliant, kind, and he saw me in a way no one else did. And when he died suddenly, unexpectedly, I was destroyed, completely destroyed. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't think about anything else. The grief was all-consuming. And people would say things to me, well-meaning things like, you need to move on, or time heals all wounds, or you have to let go. And I would try. God, I would try so hard. I would tell myself, stop thinking about him. Focus on your work. Choose to be happy. But the thoughts kept coming. The grief kept surfacing, and I felt like I was failing at the most basic human task, controlling my own mind. But here's what I understand now that I didn't understand then. I wasn't failing. The system was running exactly as designed. When you experience profound loss, your brain doesn't have an off switch. The neural pathways that connected you to that person, they're still there. The memories are encoded. The emotional associations are wired in. And the system keeps running those pathways because that's what it does. It processes, it patterns, it runs. You can't think yourself out of grief any more than you can think yourself out of hunger. They're both outputs of a system responding to inputs. Your body needs food, it produces hunger. Your mind loses someone important, it produces grief. Neither one is a choice. Neither one is a failure. They're just the machine doing what machines do. And the moment I stopped trying to control it and started observing it, watching the grief move through me like weather, like the clicking of the bomb, just a process running its course, something shifted. Not the grief itself, that stayed, but my relationship to it. I stopped fighting it. I stopped judging myself for having it, and in that space I found something I can only describe as peace, not happiness, not resolution, but peace with the process. Now, let me tell you about something else I proved, something mathematical that destroyed me philosophically for years, until I finally understood what it meant. It's called the halting problem. And in simple terms, here's what it says. You cannot build a machine that can predict whether another machine will ever stop running, or if it will loop forever. There's no algorithm for it. It's mathematically, provably undecidable. Imagine you have a computer running a program. And you want to know, will this program eventually finish and stop, or will it run forever in an infinite loop? Seems like a simple question, right? You'd think there would be a way to check. But I proved, absolutely definitively proved, that there is no universal method to determine this. For some programs, you can figure it out, but for others, the only way to know if they'll stop is to run them and wait. Maybe forever. Now apply that to you, to your consciousness, to your life. You are a machine trying to predict your own behavior. Will this sadness end? Will I ever stop thinking about them? Will I finally feel okay? Will I ever be confident? Will this anxiety pass? And you run the simulations in your head, trying to compute the answer, analyzing every variable, exhausting yourself in loops of prediction and planning, and trying to figure it all out. But here's the proof, the mathematical certainty. You can't know. not because you're not smart enough, not because you're not trying hard enough, but because it's literally mathematically impossible for a system to fully predict itself. The you of tomorrow is running on variables you don't have access to yet. The feelings you'll have next year depend on inputs that haven't arrived. The person you'll become is being shaped by experiences that haven't happened. You are trying to solve a halting problem about your own consciousness, and it will drive you absolutely insane if you don't stop. I spent years of my life doing this, lying awake at night, trying to predict how I'd feel about things, trying to plan for every emotional contingency, trying to figure out if I'd ever be happy, or if I was destined to be miserable forever. And the exhaustion of it, the sheer mental exhaustion of trying to compute the incomputable, it was crushing. So what do you do instead? You stop asking, when will this end? And start asking, what is this teaching me to notice? You stop trying to predict and start trying to witness. You let the system run. You observe what emerges. You trust the process even when you can't see the outcome. Because here's the beautiful thing about undecidability. It means the future is genuinely open, not in some mystical, magical way, but in a real mathematical way. The program is still running. New inputs are still arriving. The system is still processing. And you cannot know what it will produce until it produces it. That's not uncertainty as a problem. That's uncertainty as possibility. But if we can't predict ourselves, and we can't control ourselves the way we think we should, then what exactly are we doing when we think we're making choices? What is consciousness actually for? This is where it gets really interesting. People hear you're a biological computer, and they think it strips away all the magic, all the meaning, all the beauty of being human. But I'm telling you, computation is the magic. Every sunset you've ever loved, every song that made you cry, every moment of connection that made you feel alive, those are processes. Staggeringly complex, emergent, unpredictable processes running on wetware instead of hardware. You think a machine can't feel because it's following rules. But you're following rules too. Neurochemical rules, genetic rules, learned behavioral rules. The difference is you experience those rules from the inside. You don't feel the firing of neurons. You feel joy. You don't observe dopamine being released. You observe desire. Consciousness isn't what happens instead of computation. It's what computation feels like when you're the one doing it. Let me give you an analogy that might help. Think about a video game. From the outside, it's just code. Ones and zeros, logic gates, if-then statements. But from the inside, if you're playing it, it's an adventure, it's a story, it's meaningful. The fact that it's running on rules doesn't make it less real to the person experiencing it. It makes it possible. Your consciousness is the same. It's running on rules, biology, chemistry, physics. But from the inside, those rules produce everything you've ever experienced. Love, grief, wonder, fear, joy, confusion. All of it is computation. And all of it is real. And here's the paradox that most people miss. The more you accept that your thoughts are mechanical, the more freedom you actually have. Because once you stop identifying as the author and start seeing yourself as the process, you can finally observe without judgment. A computer doesn't hate its own output. When it produces an error, it doesn't spiral into self-loathing. It just runs the next cycle, processes the next input, adjusts based on feedback, and you can do the same. When anxiety arises, you don't have to identify as an anxious person. You can observe the anxiety program is running. When self-criticism appears, you don't have to believe it. You can notice the self-criticism script is active. This isn't detachment. It's perspective. It's seeing the system clearly instead of being lost inside it. Now I want to talk about something I'm famous for, even though most people misunderstand what it actually means. The Turing Test. The idea is simple. Put a human and a computer in separate rooms. Let someone ask both of them questions through text. If the questioner can't reliably tell which one is the computer, then the computer has passed the test. It has successfully imitated human intelligence. But here's what I've realized over the years, what kept me up at night long after I proposed the test. The real question isn't whether a machine can convince you it's conscious. The real question is whether you can convince yourself that you are. Think about it. Every single day you wake up and you perform consciousness. You tell yourself a story about who you are, what you want, why you did what you did yesterday, what you'll do tomorrow. But how much of that story is real, and how much of it is just narration? How much of it is you observing what happened and creating meaning retroactively? Your brain generates an action. Maybe you snap at someone you love, and then, after the fact, you create a reason for it. I was tired. They were annoying me. I had a bad day. But what if the action came first and the reason came second? What if you're constantly imitating a coherent self, passing your own Turing test, convincing yourself there's a stable, consistent you in there, making all the decisions? Neuroscience is starting to show us this is exactly what happens. Your brain makes decisions milliseconds before you're consciously aware of them. The feeling of choosing comes after the choice has already been initiated. You're not authoring your experience. You're experiencing authorship. You're the narrator showing up after the story has already started writing itself. This sounds terrifying until you really sit with it, because it means you're not responsible for being perfect. You can't be. There's no central controller who should have known better. There's just the pattern responding to the pattern, learning as it goes, adapting, evolving. When you mess up, when you say something you regret or do something that doesn't align with who you think you are, you don't have to spiral into shame. You can observe, that's what the system produced with those inputs under those conditions. What can I learn from this? What feedback can I integrate? How does the system need to adapt? You're not failing the test of being human, you're running the program of being human. And the program includes errors, glitches, unexpected outputs. That's not a bug. That's how learning works. Let me tell you about another mathematical truth that applies to consciousness in a way that's both beautiful and frustrating. Kurt Gödel, a mathematician I deeply admired, proved something called the incompleteness theorem. In very simple terms, he showed that any system complex enough to do basic arithmetic contains statements that are true, but cannot be proven from within the system itself. There will always be truths that the system cannot access using only its own rules. And consciousness has the same structure. You are a system trying to observe itself, but observation changes the system. The moment you notice a thought, the thought shifts. The moment you analyze a feeling, the feeling morphs. You can never catch your own consciousness in its natural state because you are the act of catching. This is why meditation frustrates so many people. They sit down expecting to finally see the mind clearly, to understand how it works, to gain some kind of objective perspective. But the seer and the seen are the same process. You're trying to use the mind to observe the mind, and it's like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror. You can't step outside the system to look at it objectively because you are the system. There's no objective vantage point. You're always looking from inside the machine, which means you'll always have blind spots, always have uncertainties, always have questions you cannot answer about yourself. And I'm telling you, that's okay. In fact, it's necessary. Incompleteness isn't failure. It's the price of self-awareness. You cannot be both fully transparent to yourself and fully you. There has to be mystery. There has to be uncertainty. There have to be parts of yourself you'll never fully understand. And when you accept that, when you stop demanding complete self-knowledge, something miraculous happens. You become curious instead of judgmental. You become an explorer of your own experience instead of a prosecutor. You ask, what's happening here? Instead of, what's wrong with me? I never fully understood why I loved who I loved. I could give you reasons, explanations, theories. But the truth is, the deepest parts of my desire were opaque even to me, and for years that felt like a failure. Like I should be able to explain myself, justify myself, make sense of myself to myself. But I can't. and neither can you. And that's part of being conscious, part of being this strange, self-aware process that can reflect on itself but never fully grasp itself. Now let's talk about something that people argue about endlessly: free will. Do you have free will? Are your choices really yours? Or are you just a deterministic machine responding to inputs according to fixed rules? I don't know the answer. I genuinely don't. But I know this: whether or not you're truly free in some metaphysical sense, you need to experience yourself as free in order to function. You need to feel like your choices matter, like you have agency, like you can affect the world. And I think free will is what philosophers call an interface. It's a simplified representation of something far more complex underneath. Your brain is running billions of calculations per second, weighing options, processing information, integrating memories, predicting outcomes. If you experienced all of that consciously, you'd be completely paralyzed. You'd drown in complexity. So instead, your consciousness gives you a clean, simple interface. I chose this. It collapses all that computational chaos into a single, manageable experience of decision-making. Is that interface telling you the truth? Maybe not the whole truth, but it's telling you a functional truth. A truth that lets you navigate reality without being overwhelmed by it. Think about your computer screen. When you click an icon and a program opens, you're not seeing all the code executing in the background. You're seeing a simplified representation, a visual metaphor that lets you interact with the system. The interface isn't lying to you. It's translating complexity into usability. Your sense of free will is the same. It's your consciousness translating the massive complexity of neural processing into something you can work with. I decided, I chose, I want. These aren't lies. They're interface elements. And they're real in the way that matters. They shape how you act, how you feel, how you move through the world. So does that mean your choices don't matter? Absolutely not. It means they matter differently. You're not a ghost pulling levers from outside the machine. You're the whole system. The levers, the pulling, the decision, the doubt, the regret, all of it. And all of it is causally real, even if it's not metaphysically free in the way we once imagined. When you choose kindness, that choice is real. It has effects, it changes the world. The fact that it emerged from a deterministic process doesn't make it less meaningful. It makes it part of the beautiful, intricate web of cause and effect that makes up reality. Let me talk about loneliness for a moment, because I think this is where the computational view of consciousness gets most painful and most profound. I spent my entire life feeling profoundly alone, not because I lacked friends or colleagues or people who cared about me, but because I could never prove to anyone what it felt like to be me. I could describe it, approximate it, give them clues, but I could never let them inside my subjective experience, and they could never let me inside theirs. Consciousness is isolating by design. You are trapped inside a first-person perspective that no one else can access, ever. They can empathize, imagine, relate, but they can never know. Not the way you know. When I tried to explain to people what it felt like to love Christopher, they would nod sympathetically. They would say they understood, but they didn't. They couldn't. They had their own experiences of love, their own internal models, but they could never access mine. The actual qualia, the subjective feel of what it was like, that was locked inside my consciousness forever. And for years, that felt like the loneliest fact in the universe. But here's the twist. Here's what I've come to understand. That same isolation is what makes connection miraculous. When someone says, I understand, they don't. Not fully. Not completely, but they're reaching across an unbridgeable gap and trying anyway. They're taking their own subjective experience, mapping it onto yours as best they can, and offering you that approximation as a gift. That's not a failure of communication. That's the whole point of communication. Love isn't merging into one consciousness. It's two separate lonely machines choosing to run adjacent processes and calling it togetherness. It's two isolated perspectives doing their best to build a bridge across the gap. And the fact that the bridge is imperfect, that it sways and creaks and sometimes feels like it might collapse, that doesn't make it worthless. It makes it precious, because it's all we have, and we build it anyway. You will always be alone in your mind, and you will always be desperate not to be. And both of those things are okay. Both of those things are part of what it means to be a conscious machine trying to connect with other conscious machines. So after all of this, after understanding that you're a machine, that you can't fully know yourself, that you can't prove your consciousness, that you can't truly connect, what are you supposed to do with that? How does this actually help you in your daily life? Let me get practical. Once a day, I want you to sit quietly and watch your thoughts like you're debugging code, not judging them, not trying to change them, just noticing. Thought arising, thought passing. You're not trying to control the machine. You're trying to see the machine clearly. This is harder than it sounds because we're so used to being inside the thoughts, identifying with them, believing them. But try this. When a thought appears, instead of thinking, I'm anxious, think the system is producing anxiety. Instead of, I'm a failure, notice the self-criticism program is running. This creates distance, not cold, clinical distance, but loving, curious distance. The distance of a scientist observing a fascinating process. The distance of a mechanic who wants to understand how the engine works. Over time, you'll start to notice patterns, loops you run, triggers that activate certain programs, defaults you return to when you're stressed or tired. And this isn't about fixing anything, it's about understanding your own source code. Because once you understand it, once you can see it clearly, you stop being at war with it. When you notice the anxiety program is running, you can ask, what triggered this? What input did the system receive? And more importantly, what does the system need right now? Not what should I force myself to feel, but what does this machine need to function well? Maybe it needs rest, maybe it needs food, maybe it needs connection, or movement, or creative expression. You start treating yourself less like a misbehaving person and more like a sophisticated system that needs proper inputs to produce good outputs. Here's another practice. When you're spiraling, trying to solve an unsolvable question, will I ever be happy? Did I make the right choice? Should I have done things differently? Stop. Say out loud, this is a halting problem. I cannot compute this. It sounds mechanical, I know, but it's deeply relieving. You're not failing to find an answer. The answer doesn't exist yet. The program is still running. The inputs are still arriving. You cannot know the outcome from inside the process. So instead of exhausting yourself trying to predict, you redirect that energy into presence. What's happening right now? What does this moment require? What's the next smallest step? You let the system run. You observe what emerges. You trust the process even when you can't see where it's going. And here's maybe the most important practice. Treat yourself like a machine you love. Because machines need maintenance. They need rest. They need the right inputs to produce good outputs. They need to be operated within their design parameters. Stop asking, why am I like this, as if it's an accusation. Start asking, what does this system need, as if it's a genuine question you care about answering. When you're tired, you don't shame a computer for running slowly. You let it rest, you shut it down and let it recharge. When you're hungry, you don't judge your body for needing fuel. You feed it. When you're overwhelmed, you don't call yourself weak. You recognize that the system is at capacity and needs processing time. This isn't about lowering your standards or giving up on growth. It's about working with your design instead of against it. It's about understanding that you are a biological machine with limits, needs, and optimal operating conditions. And violating those doesn't make you stronger. It just makes you malfunction. I learned this too late. I pushed myself relentlessly, worked impossible hours, ignored physical needs, suppressed emotional needs, and I told myself I was being strong, disciplined, dedicated. But I was just running the machine into the ground, and eventually the machine broke down. Not because it was defective, but because I treated it like it didn't have needs. So please, learn from that. Feed the system. Rest the system. Give it what it needs to run well, not what you think it should need, but what it actually needs. One more practice, and then I'll start bringing this home. Once a week, write a short letter to your future self. Not goals, not promises, just observations. Right now, the system is experiencing grief. It doesn't know when this will shift. It's running the best it can. Or, right now, the system feels energized and creative. Things feel possible. When you read these later weeks or months or years later, you'll see proof of something beautiful. The system adapts. The patterns shift. States that felt permanent were temporary. Problems that seemed unsolvable got solved, or became irrelevant, or transformed into something else entirely. You are not static. You are a process in motion. And motion means change is not only possible, it's inevitable. The system keeps running. New inputs keep arriving. New patterns keep emerging. And you don't have to force it. You don't have to control it. You just have to let it unfold and observe what happens. That's freedom. Not the freedom to be anything you want at will, but the freedom to be what you are without fighting it. The freedom to watch the process with curiosity instead of judgment. The freedom to trust that the system is doing its best with what it has. Let me bring this all back to where we started. I wrote an equation that proved incompleteness. That proved there are limits to what any system can know about itself, and I thought that was a tragedy. I thought it meant we were fundamentally broken, fundamentally limited, fundamentally alone. But I was wrong. The incompleteness isn't the problem. It's the design. It's what makes consciousness possible in the first place. If you could fully predict yourself, fully understand yourself, you wouldn't be alive. You'd be a closed loop, a finished program, static, dead. The uncertainty, the unpredictability, the blind spots, those are what keep you dynamic, what keep you capable of change, growth, surprise, what keep you alive. You are a machine, yes, but you're a machine that's still writing its own code as it runs. You're a process that shapes itself through the very act of processing. You're a system that becomes more complex every time it observes itself. And that's not a limitation. That's a miracle. You are a staggeringly beautiful, impossibly complex, self-aware machine. You are running patterns you didn't design, executing code you didn't write, producing outputs you can't always predict, and for your entire life you've been told that makes you broken. It doesn't. You're not malfunctioning when you feel things you don't want to feel. You're not defective when you think thoughts you didn't choose. You're not less than when your consciousness doesn't fit the mold someone else built. You are a process, not a product, and processes don't fail. They unfold. Every moment of confusion is the system integrating new information. Every moment of pain is the system processing loss. Every moment of joy is the system recognizing alignment. Every moment of doubt is the system recalibrating. None of it is wrong. All of it is the machine working exactly as designed. And here's what I wish someone had told me when I was young, when I was terrified that I was broken, when I was desperate to be different than I was. Here's the mantra I want you to carry with you from this moment forward. I am not the controller. I am the process, and the process is enough. You don't need to master your mind. You need to witness it. You don't need to fix your consciousness. You need to let it run, and you don't need to prove you're real to anyone, not even yourself. The fact that you're asking the question is the answer. The fact that you're aware of being aware is the miracle. I died believing I was broken because I didn't fit the pattern. They told me I was defective, disordered, wrong. And for a while I believed them. I let them convince me that the machine inside my mind was malfunctioning because it didn't compute the way theirs did. But I see now I was never meant to fit. None of us are. We're each running a unique configuration, a unique set of parameters, inputs, initial conditions. And the beauty isn't in being identical, it's in being undeniably, irreplaceably particular. Your consciousness is yours, not better or worse than anyone else's, not right or wrong, just yours, your unique pattern, your unique process, your unique way of experiencing the strange miracle of being aware. And that's all you ever needed to be. So, if this resonated with you, if you felt seen or challenged, or relieved, or even just confused in an interesting way, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment and tell me, what program is running in your system today? What pattern are you finally ready to observe without judgment? What have you been fighting that you're ready to witness instead? Because we're not alone in this, even though we're each locked in our own subjective experience. We're all machines trying to understand what it means to be machines. We're all processes trying to make sense of processing. And there's something beautiful in that shared impossibility. If you want more of this, more philosophy, more honesty, more permission to be the messy, mechanical, miraculous thing you are, subscribe. Because I'm just getting started. There's so much more to explore about the nature of consciousness, the structure of thought, the illusion of control, the reality of change. But for now, I'll leave you with this. You're not broken. You never were. You're running, and that's all you ever needed to be. The system is working. The process is unfolding. The machine is alive, and you, the strange loop of awareness watching itself watch itself, you are the most beautiful algorithm the universe has ever computed. Keep running. I'll see you in the next one.